It's easy to think of technology as something that just appears. But the truth is, behind every single leap forward, there's always a person with a vision. This is the story of one of the greats, Grace Hopper, a rebellious, absolutely brilliant woman who completely changed how we talk to machines. And this quote, this was basically her life's motto. It perfectly captures her spirit. This whole philosophy is what drove a career of just relentless innovation. She wasn't going to wait around for someone to say yes. She just went ahead and built the future, and then dared them to argue with the results. So what was this big vision of hers? Well, it was an idea that was, honestly, just wild for its time. She believed that computers, these massive room-sized calculators that only expert mathematicians could use, should one day be for everyone. And that right there was the huge roadblock. Early computers were incredibly powerful, sure, but they were also, in a way, incredibly stupid. They couldn't understand words or concepts or simple instructions. Nope, they only understood these long, complicated strings of numbers. Grace Hopper decided to dedicate her entire life to solving this exact translation problem. So where does a story like this even begin? Well, her journey didn't start in some Silicon Valley garage. It was forged in the fire of World War II, a conflict that yanked her out of the quiet life of academia and threw her right into the heart of the computing revolution. I mean, just look at her background. It was staggering. A Vassar grad, one of the first women ever to get a PhD in math from Yale. But when the war broke out, this 34-year-old professor knew she had to serve. The Navy told her she was too old and too thin, but she wouldn't take no for an answer. She got a waiver, and she joined up. And what was her very first assignment in the Navy? Tame this beast. She was shipped off to Harvard University to work on the Mark I computer, which was a 5-ton electromechanical giant. This slide really puts the scale of that challenge into perspective. This wasn't some slick silicon chip we think of today. Oh no, this was a mechanical monster full of clinking relays, switches, and over 500 miles of wire. To get it to do anything, they had to physically feed it instructions punched onto paper tape. And get this, a single multiplication problem took 6 whole seconds. But she didn't just operate the machine, she explained it to the world. They tasked her with documenting how this thing even worked, and she ended up writing this massive 561-page manual. It became, for all intents and purposes, the world's first ever textbook on computer programming, making this incomprehensible machine understandable. After the war, Hopper's work shifted into a whole new phase. She was about to tackle her biggest idea yet, the one that would finally build a bridge between human language and the cold, hard logic of a machine. And as it turns out, her work also gave us one of the most famous little stories in all of tech history. We all talk about debugging our code, right? Well, the origin of that term is surprisingly literal. Yep, the story is true. A moth actually flew into the Mark II computer, got itself stuck in one of the mechanical relays, and brought the whole system to a grinding halt. Her team had to carefully pull it out, and then they taped it right into their logbook with the note, "First actual case of bug being found." Now, to be fair, engineers had used the term bug for glitches since Edison's time, but this is what cemented debugging into the language of computing forever. But this whole story just brings us back to the real problem she was trying to solve. Programming back then was an absolute nightmare. You had to write everything in these long, painful strings of numbers that only the machine could possibly understand. It was painstaking work, and just one tiny mistake could completely wreck hours of calculations. So Hopper's solution was it was revolutionary. She asked a simple question. Why can't we write our instructions in something that looks like plain English and just let the computer do the hard work of translating it? Her answer was something she called the compiler, a program that basically acts as a translator. It turns human-like commands into the complex machine code the computer needs. This was a total game changer. But of course, brilliant ideas aren't always welcomed with open arms. Her idea was met with huge skepticism. I mean, her bosses and colleagues literally told her it was impossible. They said, "Grace, computers are for crunching numbers. They can't ever understand words." It took her 3 years to finally convince them that her invention actually worked. That incredible breakthrough really set the stage for her next great achievement, which was scaling her vision from just a single language into an international standard, a standard that would go on to run the world of business and government for decades.
By the late 1950s, the computer industry was kind of a mess. Every big company, IBM, Univac, they all had their own proprietary language. So a program you wrote for one machine was totally useless on another. It was like a digital Tower of Babel, and it was just incredibly inefficient.
So, the US government finally stepped in. They brought together a committee to create one common language just for business applications. And who did they lean on? Grace Hopper and her work with Flowmatic. The result was COBOL, and her foundational contribution earned her the affectionate nickname Grandma COBOL. Now, you're probably thinking, a language from 1959? That's got to be ancient history, right? Well, not so fast. COBOL is shockingly alive and well today. It is the hidden engine chugging along behind a huge chunk of our global economy. Why? Because these massive banking and financial systems are so deeply embedded and so critical that trying to replace them is just way too risky and expensive. So yep, her work from over 60 years ago is still quietly running the world.
All of this work really built up to her final act. Because Hopper wasn't just a programmer. She was a teacher, she was a mentor, and a truly brilliant communicator who became one of the most public faces in all of science, lovingly known far and wide as Amazing Grace. And this was her most famous trick in her lectures. To explain why computer circuits had to be so incredibly small, she would hand out these little pieces of wire to everyone in the audience. Each one was exactly 11.8 inches long. Why? Because that's the maximum distance light can travel in 1 nanosecond. It was this simple, tangible way to show everyone that speed is limited by physical distance. To make computers faster, you literally had to shrink the machine. Just brilliant. Her career was just a stunning list of firsts. She was constantly breaking down barriers for women in math, in computing, and in the military. She retired from the Navy as a Rear Admiral at the age of 79, making her the oldest active duty officer at the time. And her legacy absolutely endures. Right now, there is a U.S. Navy destroyer named the USS Hopper sailing the seas. And every year, the Grace Hopper celebration brings together tens of thousands of women in computing. It's the largest conference of its kind in the world, inspiring a whole new generation to follow in her footsteps. So when you boil it all down, Grace Hopper's true genius wasn't just in the code itself, but in her relentless, passionate focus on communication. She knew that the awesome power of technology is completely wasted if it can't be understood and used by people. Which leaves us with a pretty big question for our own time. In a world of complex AI and mystifying algorithms,